Hello. If you've seen part one of this drawer building bonanza, you'll have seen me turn the dead space beneath this yellow metal cabinet behind me here into some incredibly useful drawers to store zines and prints and other stock that I sell on my online store and at art markets. It's all in an effort to reduce the pile of boxes that has been sat against the wall in my little studio here for the past, 3 or 4 months. This is part two, where I'm going to put a nice big drawer into this other metal cabinet on the other side of the room. I fit quite a lot into those first two drawers, so I'm pretty eager to see what I can get out of the way over here as well. So let's do it. In part one, I talked about how I ripped this board down because I only needed half the width of it, and I thought that a longer offcut would likely be more useful for future projects than a load of smaller pieces. Well, as it turned out, I needed it for this very project. I'm basically building a little cabinet for a drawer to sit into with oak sides and a plywood back, top and bottom. And I thought I had offcuts of oak that were long enough to use for the sides, but I didn't. And so the first thing I had to do was make a couple of panels. So I cut that board down and then I ripped a clean edge onto each piece, which would help with joining them together during the glue up. I had to glue these panels separately because I didn't really have enough clamps to do them at the same time, but I wasn't in a rush, so I don't mind. I grain matched the drawers in part one, but I couldn't do that here since I was only using offcuts. But before I glued them, I did take some time to try and match the grain as best I could. Where it'll be in the room means like you probably won't even see it, but I still want it to look as nice as it can. This feels excessive, I have to say.
I really thought that this cabinet was going to be much easier than the other one because it's got these straight legs, and so I didn't have to build spacers to account for that taper. I could just go right to the carcass. So I was measuring up for that this morning, and it is not square in every conceivable way that it could not be square. And so rather than measuring, I just spent a couple of hours building these templates. There are a couple of screws on each corner attaching the legs to the main body. So you can see in these templates I've accounted for the little notches that I need to take out. Wow, that's dusty. I apologize for that. We're going through a transitionary period in the studio right now. When I was done with that side piece, I thought, hey, I wonder if I can just mirror it and flip it to the other side. No, crazy gap. I don't know how this thing is standing. But anyway, I had to make a custom one for the other side too. This is like hard mode for building drawers, I think. I've never really done it before, and it would be so much easier, it feels like, if I just built this cabinet square myself. Each piece is going to have to be a little more custom than I was hoping for, so this is going to be interesting and challenging.
Back in the workshop, both panels were done, and I used a chisel to clean up the little bits of glue squeeze out that I couldn't wipe away. It's funny, a couple of months ago I made a wooden top for the yellow cabinet in my little home studio, and that was my first panel glue up. But look at me now, just casually making panels because a project needs it. Gave them a little bit of a sanding too, just to smooth everything out, and then I took the two side templates and traced around them onto the panels, being careful to be as accurate as I could. I ripped them down using this quick little rip jig that I made a while ago. It can be a little bit fiddly to set up, but basically I can line a pencil mark up to the edge of the jig and I know that it will cut exactly along that line. It's pretty cool. So both of those cut to their final height. I started working on the width. And I just really gradually worked up to the lines that I'd drawn out for myself. And because some of them were slightly angled, I used little thin pieces of offcuts as shims to angle the workpiece to one side. I just kept making tiny adjustments to creep up to the exact dimensions. I spent ages at it, and I was honestly so happy with how well they matched up to the templates. I was not sure how well I was going to be able to do that, but that is pretty perfect. Cool. And then I went through the very same process with the drawer front, which I'll save you from watching again. This side feels so wrong because it's so obviously not 90 degrees, but that is what the cabinet's like. Next, I had to cut down some stretchers for the back of the cabinet, so I used some scraps of 3/4 inch birch ply for those. I started by cutting a clean end onto each one and then cut them to size. Before attaching those stretchers to the sides, I cut out the notches for the screws, just like this. I didn't record every one, but just imagine me doing this 7 more times. And then when those were done, I fixed it together using pocket screws. And then I was back home to check the fit, which I was going to do anyway. But after the little oopsie on the other drawers, I wanted to be extra sure. Thankfully, they fit so nicely. Ooh, okay. That fits pretty great. Wow, that fits pretty great. Here's how wonky this thing is, right? I had to cut it this way to make it fit. If I put the front in the wrong way around, it doesn't go. And there's a huge gap along this side. I was telling my dad about it, and he was like, it's probably because your floor is uneven, which makes total sense. I have the legs adjusted to make this thing straight. So yeah, it's probably a combination of like the cabinet being a little wonky and the floor not being quite straight. But anyway, once it's in, you won't even notice. So it was back to the workshop to cut a rabbet all the way around the underside to accept the base. I forgot to turn my mic on for a little bit here, so I'm just going to make a router noise and talk over that, which I think is like so stupid that it's funny. I was using this new rabbeting bit I got, and it was able to absolutely hog through oak, no bother. So cutting this took no time at all and left a really nice clean cut. I actually cut my finger on the bit just taking it out of the box. It's really sharp. When the underside was done, I flipped it over to cut a rabbet into the top. But because the sides are different heights to account for the wonk in the cabinet, I only cut one on the short side, which you'll see why. It'll make sense in a sec. Oh man. I really haven't done much with chisels before, and so I decided to square off the rounded corners left by the router. It wasn't hugely necessary to do this at all, in fact, because it's just not going to be visible when the cabinet is installed. But that also made it the perfect time to practice because the stakes are so low. I started by making a little knife wall along each of my lines and then slowly started to remove material. I also made sure that my chisel was as sharp as I could get it before trying this, but I'm not going to show you that because I almost definitely didn't do it quite right. But anyway, for my first proper attempt, I was really happy with the results. Here's a kind of a before with the other end and then the after. Feels pretty good to get it right. It's a very satisfying thing to do. So here I'm taking a measurement off the shorter side so that I can cut a rabbet to match that height on the taller side. So then using a router with a fence, I could cut a rabbet the correct distance from the edge and then gradually work up to the depth that I wanted. Again, the mic was off here, so I'm just using this little scrap piece of 1/4 inch ply as a stand-in for the top, but you can see here why I had to cut that last rabbet where I did. The opening underneath the cabinet may not be square, but I'm going to build a square box to go into it. Here I'm marking out my drawer base and the top and bottom of the cabinet carcass. And then I rough cut those down along with the sides for my drawer. And there are just 3 strips here because I'll cut one of them in half later for the shorter front and back. I put the stretchers back onto the carcass so that I could measure how wide the top needed to be. And then I cut that down using my crosscut sled. I had a front support on this sled, but I took it off in the last video and I think I'm going to leave it off. It kind of feels plenty strong without it. And I think it's better to be able to see the full blade. I feel like I'm cutting more accurate since I did that. That top fit very nicely and it was very satisfying. And then I flipped it over to mark the width of the base. And then I ripped it in half because just like in the first video, I'm not using solid pieces for the tops and bottoms in the interest of saving material. And so with the cabinet assembled, I took measurements for the drawer and then cut the parts to length off camera. I figured you don't necessarily need to see me making every single cut. And here I'm just giving them a quick sanding because it's a lot easier to do that at this stage before they are a drawer. And then I figured out how I wanted to arrange the pieces. The veneer on this plywood is 0.5 mm, so you can't sand that much and it chips out pretty easily. So I was mostly arranging the pieces so that the worst of it would be hidden on the outside or behind the drawer front or along the back where I'd have to, pull the drawer out fully to see it. And then I got the drawer put together and I didn't use any clamps to do it. I just made sure that they were lined up correctly, nice and flush. And then I used glue and brad nails to hold it together. I made sure to fit the shorter sides into the longer sides because I was thinking about the forces that's put on a drawer when you pull it open. So I tested the fit of the drawer and right away realized a pretty major problem. That drawer should have been an inch narrower. I totally forgot to leave room for the slides. It wasn't a major problem, thankfully, because I could still make it work without them. But it did cause another issue where the box was getting caught on the base when I pushed it back in. If it was riding on slides, it wouldn't have been in contact with the base at all, so that wouldn't have been a problem. My solution was to put in some runners that the drawer could ride along, and they worked out great. These are just scraps of 1/4 inch ply. I'm not sure if I should be using hardwood for these. I honestly can't imagine they're going to have to put up with much wear and tear, but let me know if you have strong opinions about this, please. I cut those runners down to length and then I decided to rip them down a little thinner too. I'm going to put paste wax on them, but I also figured if they were thinner, there'd be less friction, which would help the drawer slide more smoothly. I did another quick little test here and they just worked so nicely. Back at home, I got it put in place again and attached the drawer front. Hello, mister. What do you think? Oh, you know what? If I know my cat, I think he'll prefer the drawer. Ozzy, What do you think of this? Damn. I guess it's not a good drawer. Here I've just got some double-sided tape on the back of the drawer front to temporarily keep it in place. When the drawer is pulled out far enough here, it's coming in contact with the floor, and obviously I don't want to scratch the floor, so later I'll add some little felt feet that it can slide along. I gotta fix these runners down.
If you've already watched my previous video, you'll have seen me talk about these metal handles. I bought them to match the handles on the yellow cabinet over there, and the idea was to put one onto the front of each of the drawers to give a sense of cohesion, you know? But the first set of drawers that I built just weren't tall enough for this type of handle, and so I went with a polyester strap instead, and I think it looks really good. Now over here, I do have the room to mount this as intended, but I think it would look a lot better if all three of the drawer fronts matched, and so I'm going to go for the same type of strap pull kind of handle over here too.
So I won't go into these pulls too much because you can see me make them in part 1 if you want. But basically there's just a little piece of polyester strap that's doubled over, and they're really easy to burn a hole through. And then you can put a screw with a washer on it through it, and it just acts as a really simple pull. I think the design is really cool. Here I'm just measuring to find the center of the drawer front, and then I could figure out how high I wanted the pull to sit and get it fixed in place. And then it was time to sand and finish everything, which I'm just going to fly past because you've already seen me do it in part 1. Once again, I'm using Danish oil, and for the first coat I mixed it with 20% white spirits. On the carcass here, for the first coat, I only really finished the part that will be visible, but later I decided that that looked unnecessarily messy, and so I finished the rest of the oak and all of the ply as well. So I wiped away the excess, and then I did 2 more coats over the next couple of days, and while that was curing fully, I turned my attention back to the drawers. In part 1, I explained how some of the drawers had some burn marks along the top edges, and so I painted them red and blue to cover it up. And so to further that sense of cohesion between the two cabinets, and also to cover up some of the burn marks here, I painted the top of this drawer too. I started with a white base coat because the yellow is quite a light color, so I wanted to try and make it more opaque. And I gotta say, I think they look really cool together. I'm glad I did this. While that paint dried, I fixed the runners in place. And as I said earlier, I'm not sure if these should be hardwood, but they did need to be fixed then because they were coming out with the drawers when I opened it. I just used a little bit of glue so that if I need to break them off in the future, you know, hopefully I can maybe do that a bit easier. And then I applied some paste wax to help the drawer glide along those runners. I put some onto the sides of the cabinet and then onto the drawer itself, anywhere where 2 parts might be rubbing together. And then for the final time, I could reattach the drawer front and the pull. You'll notice I didn't put any finish onto the plywood drawer. I didn't do it on the other 2 either. I really don't know what to be using or how necessary it was. Like, I could see that in a kitchen where there's moisture, you probably would want to protect your plywood cabinets and drawers, but I don't think I have to worry about it in this room. But again, if you know about that, like, please do let me know. Thank you. Then it was time for the final install, which is just so satisfying. I've been working on these on and off for a few weeks, and to see it come together so nicely, it's a great thing. I filled the drawer with prints and some extra zines that wouldn't fit into the other drawers. I'm speeding through this bit because I thought that this is where the video would end, but I was wrong. After I filled the drawer, I recorded this bit about future plans to organize the place, and I talked about moving some of this stuff and maybe putting a shelf midway. And then I finished recording and packed up. I was kind of just sitting here thinking about it a bit more, and I realized that these brackets sticking down would be absolutely perfect for another smaller shelf, and so I got to work on it. I had some of these brackets left over from when I put my shelves up, but they come in white, which is so boring, and so I sanded them down to give me a better surface for priming and painting. I had some of the same red oak that I used on the shelves too, and so I chopped it down to the right length and then had to cut some notches out to fit around the upright brackets. I was really eager to do a little more work with a chisel, and so I used a jigsaw to remove the bulk of the material for these notches and then cleaned it up the rest of the way with a chisel. It's so fun, man. It takes a bit of time and patience, but the results are a lot cleaner and it feels really satisfying. I feel like a real woodworker with a chisel in my hand, you know? Anyway, you know the usual then. I gave it a nice sanding, finished it with Danish oil. I used gloves this time because I am responsible. Look at that. This wood and this finish is so beautiful. I gave it a couple more coats, and while it cured, I sprayed the brackets blue. I thought it'd be a really nice contrast to the yellow. I also gave the brackets a clear coat, and then a few days later when everything was dry, I put the shelves in place. When I sprayed some of these yellow brackets, I think I put the clear coat on a bit too early, so some of the paint ran. But these look like they could have been bought like this, which I'm so happy about. And then I loaded up my shelf, first with cardboard backing for packing prints. I didn't used to use these, and there's nothing worse than selling someone a print and then watching them stuff it into their bag. That is not making it home in one piece, you know? And then I moved the packaged prints out of the drawer that I just built and put them here. And then this last thing was a stack of thank you postcards that I ship out with online orders. So obviously it's not a very tall shelf, but it's perfect for this shop stuff. And look at these brackets, they look so good. So this drawer now contains prints that have yet to be packaged. In this box we have some stickers, and this one is enamel pins. It's kind of hard to see, but that one's a snake wrapped around a banana. And the A4 prints that did live in that drawer now live over here. I'm scooting like a crab on my arse. So the prints are on the bottom there, and then there's some like envelopes, and up here are the bags that I put my prints in. They're actually not plastic, they're cornstarch, so they're biodegradable, which is cool. Just putting up this little shelf got rid of 3 more boxes, and now the pile that I showed you at the start has been reduced to this. Look at it, it's pitiful. These are actually empty, but I need them for traveling to art markets, so I'll have to figure out something there. So there's obviously a little ways to go, but man, what an improvement in these last 2 videos. I'm so pleased. I think I can reopen my Etsy now because managing it will be manageable now that I've got this figured out. So I think that's it. Thanks for watching. No doubt I'll be back real soon, having probably made something else knowing me. So I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.